It's the Smart Driving Cars podcast. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. This edition is sponsored by the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. For more information, head to motoetf.com. I'm Fred Fishkin, along with the Faculty Chair of Autonomous Vehicle Engineering at Princeton University, Alain Kornhauser. Hi, Alain.
Good morning, Fred.
Joining us in this edition is Anthony Townsend, President and founder of Star City Group, a strategic foresight and urban planning studio, and author of Ghost Road, Beyond the Driverless Car. Thanks for jumping on board, Anthony.
I'm excited to be here.
Anthony, really great having you on board.
Thank you.
You authored a piece on Medium recently with the eye-catching headline, The 100-Year History of Self-Driving Cars. Mm-hmm. Among the things you talk about was a General Motors exhibit at the 1939 World's Fair. I know you weren't there, but tell us about this.
I was there, though, probably.
No,
I guess I wasn't there either. I wish I would have been there.
Yeah, I think this is, the exhibit was called Futurama. It was designed by Norman Bell Geddes, who was a sort of the father of streamlining, I guess, in American design. Kind of a well-known figure who helped really set the tone for industrial design in the U.S. going into the post-war boom. And this is 1939, New York, tail of the Depression. Country was actually still in sort of the second trough of the Depression. GM was laying out what they thought was a vision of metropolitan America based on automobile, which is something that I think a story of that event that has been, millions of people went to this exhibit. It filled an entire hall. There was a whole motorized kind of ride that went around it. And if you go look at it, there's some great films online. The city they were depicting kind of looks like Houston or looks like Atlanta. It's a city of freeways, high-speed freeways, and tall glass and concrete towers, and sort of low-density settlement, although very high-density commercial centers. It's kind of like what we built. This was a vision, as I write about in the book, that sort of, service people went off to war with and came back and, fully expected to be delivered to them. And in many ways it took a generation. But there was a little sort of regarded piece of that vision, which was that the highways depicted in that exhibit were fully automated. And it was a vision of automation, sort of mainframe automation, a kind of centrally coordinated, like ground traffic control system run by a metropolitan governmental authority dispatching vehicles via radio control and guiding them down the highways, which at the time was, made sense given the technologies of the day and, the sort of planning regimes that we had in place, and the trust in government competence to deliver an efficient large-scale system like that. I think it's just kind of fascinating how far we have come from that vision to the prevailing vision for automated transportation, automated vehicles today, which is that all of the intelligence is boiled down and loaded onto the vehicle. And in many ways, it's a vision that's very hostile to government getting involved at all in the rollout of that system, even though it actually takes advantage of lots of public infrastructures or publicly funded infrastructures to do its work. I think the reason I put it in there was that it's just such a pivotal moment. It's also the 30s is the time when you start seeing all kinds of depictions of automated vehicles in science fiction, not just exploring the exciting stuff, but also exploring some of the really scary scenarios, what today we would call, like a cyber attack, and the whole automated vehicle fleet going renegade and killing thousands of people. Scenarios that we're contemplating now as we think about cybersecurity regimes for automation. So I think it fascinated me, just how long these visions have been in our culture, and not just in our culture, but like in the engineering world. We've been thinking about this stuff for a very, very long time. And it's just now that like the need and the wherewithal to do it has kind of come to fruition.
It kind of took maybe Google to come along to wake everybody up and say, hey, this stuff is real. Let's get going. Huh?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, this October is going to be 10-year anniversary of the unveiling of the Google self-driving car project. And, I think as you both know, it really, that came, like 12, 18 months after the global financial crisis.
Yep.
I don't know, I would guess GM and Chrysler were still probably at some stage of their bankruptcy saga. That was scary. That was a bit of an existential moment, I think, for the auto industry to see Google come in with such a radically different vision of what automation could be, how it would be built, what the sort of fundamental assumptions about performance and safety and risk. I think that was one of the most fascinating things to me when I went in and started doing some digging, around the sort of incremental history of vehicle automation in the auto industry. Just how deliberately it had been pushed kind of under the hood, so to speak, and sort of, I wouldn't say hidden from the consumer, but wrapped up in a very technical, esoteric kind of jargon. It was almost in ways, meant to black box it and to not push too far, too fast, or overpromise to consumers, and to be really incremental about the development of the technology. And then Google comes along and just the total opposite. We're going to promise the world, we're going to pitch it in really plain language, basically the same way we've sold search and mobile phones. We're not going to call it ABS and EBS and DSC and all these crazy acronyms. We're basically not going to talk about it like engineers. And we're gonna push it so fast and aggressively and try and leap all the way to the end of the roadmap. And just seeing the amount of anxiety, the amount of sort of hasty and sometimes misguided or misdirected investment that triggered throughout the industry, throughout the auto and the rest of the tech world. It's just really been fascinating. And here we are 10 years later, and a lot of the fundamental promises of that Google announcement have both been delivered, mostly only by Google, and not delivered in many ways by the rest of the industry. Yet we've had all this other interesting stuff happen. And so that's what I was really trying to get at in the book, is like, it's not so much about, automated vehicles were sort of snake oil and this was all just a big puff of hot air, but really rather that the story has changed. And it's actually quite a sort of familiar story for emerging technologies, that the end goal, 10 years later, maybe has turned out to not be what we thought it was. That the real place this gets traction maybe isn't in passenger vehicles or sort of automobiles, but it's in personal electric vehicles, or it's in really big commercial vehicles and transit vehicles. Or it's not in passenger vehicles, but in freight vehicles. I think that's the kind of shift to me that's just really fascinating, because it creates such great opportunities for cities to think, okay, this is now really created an enormous toolkit and opened the possibilities to shape this technology in a way that aligns with what cities have been trying to do around mobility, which is get away from the car as being the only solution for every single problem. So I think, in many ways, like this is just a really promising development for cities to build a better mobility future.
One of the things we talk about a lot on the podcast, and a big thrust of Alain's work, is providing mobility for all, and having, more recently, we're talking about having the people who are going to use this technology, use these new mobility systems, have them involved now at the outset in designing this, telling the engineers, the Googles and Ubers and more, what they want, what they need, how it can really serve their needs.
Yeah, I agree. I was just speaking earlier today with a couple of designers at one of the big car rental companies, and they're trying to understand, during the pandemic, we have millions of cars sitting idle. Is there a way that we can connect these to people who are struggling to access the things that they need? Partly as a act of corporate social responsibility, but partly like, is there a business opportunity there as well? And
you mean using their rental vehicles to provide transportation to people who need it?
Yeah, and I said the only way you're going to answer that question is like field work. Like you need to go out and find out, like really closely studying what the challenges are that people are facing. What the pre-existing challenges were, like food desert, lack of banking, other challenges, lack of transit access, whatever it is. And then the new challenges that they're facing in a pandemic environment, like the car they used to borrow, they may not be able to because it was a senior citizen's car and they don't want to expose that person to potential COVID threat, right? And so trust networks that used to provide mobility may be breaking down in ways. Only then you can start to get to the question of like, can the company help, and can technology potentially be a part of building the solution, whether it's automation or app or something else. I think where you've seen success, particularly around automation, has been companies that are doing that. Waymo has certainly done a ton of that. They really took a surprisingly, but I think in the end effective, cautious approach to taking the safety supervisor out of the car. I think it took them almost 2 years to get to that point. And it's pretty clear that there's still a lot of oversight happening remotely, and that'll continue to be there for a long time. It's that kind of really, closely observing what people want out of technology and what their hopes and fears are, that I think will provide the insights that are needed to just help fit what I think people are inherently skeptical about automation, to sort of find ways to insert it into their lives in a way that they're comfortable with.
I think in watching this for a very long time, to me, I go back 5 years before Waymo to the DARPA challenges, which is, to me, what really changed the mindset, because I think I was involved in automated highway studies, as I like to say, in the 70s, 80s, 90s. Mm-hmm. And in all those studies, we were all looking at the GM view that basically you build an automated highway systems. And in fact, that's what they were called, automated highway systems. But the fundamental, certainly in the 90s, the thing that became quite obvious was that New Jersey DOT wasn't going to build an automated highway unless GM built automated cars, and GM wasn't going to build automated cars until New Jersey DOT built an automated highway. And so, the egg coming before the chicken and all that stuff, it just never had the opportunity. And the big light bulb that I think came into at least some people's minds and with the DARPA challenges was, oh my goodness, maybe we don't need an automated road. We don't need this sort of central government control of what the heck is going on. This freedom that we've had with the car might even be able to go forward. And in fact, all we need to do is put the intelligence in a car and have it go, and we don't have to build the roads. In fact, we won't ask New Jersey DOT for anything. And when they say, hey, what do you need? We're going to say, we don't need anything. Maybe a little paint, because that's what we need anyway. Hey, how about paint? You guys forgot about paint. People need paint, but not us.
I think we're at a point where even doing that is being called into question.
It is being hauled into question because, of course, this is difficult because, of course, putting enough intelligence in the vehicle is the big question.
No, I mean the government being able to maintain the road market.
Oh yeah, well, yeah, that's of course. I mean, and of course, their ego is so big. I mean, we do more than paint. We build, double decker, triple decker, who knows what did it do? Does. Don't talk to us about paint. But unfortunately, probably to me the biggest innovations were those rumble sticks that they put on the side of the road to keep us from going off the road, because that's available to everybody. I don't know if anybody's gone there and said how many lives those things have saved, because that's the lowest technology you could think of. But anyway, that's a whole other aspect of this. But that's in a sense the opportunity. The opportunity is to provide the mobility without the chauffeur. And the chauffeur, as long as we're doing it for ourselves, we write it off as free. But if we have to pay for it, and we don't have anybody to pass it off to, our bosses or whatever, or we aren't rich enough, then all of a sudden it's a real challenge. And of course, for those who are too young, too old, too poor, too whatever, they don't even have an opportunity. And so, having mobility provided for them at a very low cost, I guess, has been the panacea for this. Because, hey, if you could create it one time, the replication costs are essentially zero. Costs zero to replicate software, and buy enough lidars, and they're free too. So that's which is the fundamental technology push of everybody. Is to have that kind of scalability in these things, and the issue is how in the heck do we get there? And to me, your interest in cities. What happens to cities? Do people really want to live in towers, those 1939 towers that they had between all those interchanges and so on in the GM show? Is that really where people want to? What are your thoughts on that? Because that's going to drive it, isn't it? Or drive it, motivate it. Let's put it that way, as opposed to. What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I think. Right now, we're in a very strange period where
say the least.
Bring a lot of risks with them. The U.S. is also a particularly weird situation. So, looking globally, I think the outlook for cities to continue on their growth path is through and beyond COVID-19 is looking pretty good. That kind of settlement pattern creates a lot of access, which is what people want at the end of the day. They want access to employment, they want access to education, healthcare.
Yeah, but how is that accessed? By walking or by automated subway trains between, you know, big points? I mean,
Honestly,
what is that
I
access?
don't think they care. I mean, it's in,
You
you're
think people
a million
living
different
in Shanghai, and that people will want to live in Shanghai, really? I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to,
20 million people have decided yes. I mean, yes.
and
I think, there's a diverse set of ways of building cities and a lot of different solutions to that problem of providing access, but density is definitely part of the equation. I think automated forms of mobility can get woven into that in different ways. That's why, I in the book tried to take a look at a variety of vehicle types and really make the point that what this is going to do is make all the kinds of vehicles that we use to get around cities better, including automobiles. I think David King, a friend of mine in Arizona State, has made this point, really well. That yes, automation could make transit cheaper, more efficient, more frequent. It's also going to make cars more appealing because your automated car is going to be able to do all kinds of things that your car, your human-driven car can't do. Like it'll be able to take itself to the gas station, take itself to satellite parking, take itself to the dry cleaner to pick up, I have been running a mental exercise during the lockdown, thinking of all the things that I would have used a fully self-driving car for so that I didn't have to leave the house. And it's a pretty long list. So I think,
so
automation,
what do you think it requires the car to be able to do that?
Pardon me?
What do you think it takes the car to be able to do to go to the dry cleaners for
Like
you?
in terms of like automation levels
or your care and feeding of it, or how well you what does it require of you? Nothing? Or does it require some form of supervision, some form of liability, some form of responsibility, some form of, I don't know, what does it, or is it just carefree, it just goes down?
Yeah, we've talked about that before, Anthony, in that if you
I mean,
have a vehicle like that, who's responsible if there is a mishap of some sort? Are you responsible because you sent it out, or is the manufacturer responsible, the legal liability?
or is that a moot issue? I mean,
I would just assume it's going to be me. I can't understand any situation where manufacturers would want to shift the status quo to take on more liability.
right.
Unless
I
they
think that's true.
charge more for that service, and all of the regulation and law is based around the vehicle owner bearing that responsibility. I mean, there's going to be product liability. So I'm not an expert on this. So
Yeah, no, I'm just, well,
just
no, none of
throwing
us
that out.
are experts on that. I don't know that anybody's an expert. I guess the
my assumption is that nothing is going to change from the status quo.
I mean, one of the things that surprised me, and the thing that I was reading this morning, unfortunately, I bring that, that Penn State is asking students to come back on campus to sign this thing that says if they get sick, the university is not responsible. They're taking on that responsibility, and apparently a bunch of students are saying, "Oh no, we're not going to sign that. My goodness, we're not going to take the responsibility for this sucker."
I'm sure sometimes I look at those kinds of documents and I just say, this is completely meaningless because this is never going to hold up in court. Of course you're responsible, right? Like I'm paying, of course they're going to make people sign those waivers because some attorney said, hey, it wouldn't hurt to have them sign these waivers. It might help us, but like, that's going to really shift the responsibility. I mean, who knows?
So what does that imply then for a driverless car that GM sold me? They can't say, hey, the thing crashed when it was picking up my laundry, and of course I didn't maintain it in the last whatever months, and GM's going to say, is GM going to now be 10 times as many lawyers trying to protect themselves against that stuff, or does that end up killing it, or is that just what do you think?
Well, so where it starts to get complicated is
Yeah.
whether automation becomes a tool for them to start changing what they sell. So rather than selling me a vehicle and then walking away,
Yeah.
and GM in particular has never really made the leap of like, OnStar ought to be GM.
No, I agree with you 100%. They were there before Elon was even born. Or maybe, no, I don't know. That's
you pay, I don't know, $2,000 a year for OnStar.
Yeah.
And it would be your phone service. Like, OnStar should be your whole digital life.
Right.
Car should come as a freebie.
Yeah.
They should learn something from the phone companies, but they haven't made that leap, right? So if at some point they do make that leap, that'll totally change everything, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think question is it going to be them, or is it going to be someone like Tesla? Tesla has definitely made feints in that direction.
Yeah.
That's where they see their model going. On the other hand, they're also starting to be somewhat successful as a conventional car manufacturer. So who knows, but it's going to be that shift from products to services that'll drive those big substantial changes. I don't think it's going to look like Zipcar. It's going to be something, especially now, that's much more oriented around private transportation. I think as much as I believe in shared mobility, and I think that it's a good thing for cities to promote, I think it's a limited opportunity. I think the market has shown, one of the things I wrote about in the book was like all of the models that have been done of shared, like shared taxi mobility that produce these astounding benefits, fleet reduction sizes.
Yeah, I've run those things, so go ahead.
The amount of sharing would require like the equivalent of like a mobility Stasi on every corner to like force people into cars to get the 90% sharing. And you don't see that in Oakland or Cambridge or Brooklyn or anywhere where sharing is like really, really popular on these services. There you get maybe 30 to 40%. So there's nowhere in the world where we've seen the service adopted at the levels to produce the outcomes. So I think, that is a part of the solution, but watching what these companies do, there's always going to be a certain market that's just like private vehicles, right? That are super capable, super luxury. They're going to have all this stuff.
Yeah, for all the people who can afford it, right?
It's like, I think like GM is a real bellwether. Like, does OnStar start to become more of a service, a mobility service, as opposed to a telematics service for a vehicle? That's the game changer there. But it's never going to be, share this minivan with another family. Part of the day, it may be like, month by month or week by week or whatever, but it'll be something that's more like a cheaper, more flexible private car than like a zip car,
Does that then constrain density? I mean, does that end up really, that doesn't work in Shanghai's of this world, does it? I mean.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think, well, the difference too is, the difference is places where you have policy dampening vehicle ownership, which in the US we don't have any, right?
Right. Of course not.
Everything is, China has pretty serious dampeners on vehicle ownership, and it's sort of capped, right? So they've tried to calibrate those to match the carrying capacity of the road network and the parking. So, I think they're kind of locked in. Europe has its own constraints. I think in the US, I struggled a lot with this in the book, not just because
Yeah.
You know, the US is such a unique beast in terms of auto dependence, sprawl, decentralization, but also because it's just my own sort of ambivalence about it. Like, I grew up in the countryside, and you know, I wrote about this at the end and sort of the afterword. Like,
Yeah.
what if I could live 3 hours from Manhattan and press a button and go to work? You know, like, the fact that I, you know, am considering this tells me that tens of millions of people in this country are going to really want that. It's a very, very alluring lifestyle. It's not quite a suburban lifestyle dream.
But now that
Pretty
you have
close to it.
Zoom, now that you have Zoom, and since we're on Zoom, you want to go to Manhattan?
I love Manhattan. I was just there yesterday for the first time.
How was it?
It's fantastic. There's people out. I even saw tourists. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, but
But
you know,
hotels are cheap.
is the Met open? The Broadway's not open. The
Yeah.
restaurants aren't open. I
And
mean,
Anthony?
but the subway's clean. The subway is.
One of the
your
things
thoughts.
that you wrote about, Anthony, in the book that's interesting is that you went back and got into coding again, something you hadn't done for many years, to bring that experience into the book. Tell me about your thoughts and reasoning behind that.
I mean, you know, it was. I like to learn by doing. One of the things that I have found is a good way to learn about technology and cities, how they interact, is really understanding how the plumbing works. You know, when I was writing my dissertation, I learned so much about IP networks and fiber optic networks, and the way that there's little hints about the geography of IP networks in the naming schemes for routers. And I use that to make maps of IP networks and to try to understand what the emerging hubs of the internet were 20 years ago. And it turned out they were in some of the cities where, you know, the British had built telegraph networks 150 years ago. Go figure, right? The new roads follow the old roads. And so, you know, I wanted to do that with this. I wanted to really see machine learning at work. I wanted to, you know, understand how different APIs plug together and what the plumbing looks like, how people, you know, and what I ended up writing about really was also the style of work. If you're interested in this stuff, there's a much longer, fantastic book by Clive Thompson that came out a few months ago called Coders, which really gets deep into this. But it was the whole style of collaboration around coding these days. And, you know, this is an intensely collaborative, large-scale process, transparent, often very open, and often very problem-driven. Just the language of tools like GitHub that people use for talking about the very specific ways in which you change something and you rebase it, or you fork it, or you branch it. And it seemed to me that was also like a really interesting way of thinking about forecasting and talking about the future. There's all these possibilities for how we tell the story and how we build these forecasts collaboratively. So I was trying to use that in many ways as a metaphor for how we ought to think about forecasting and designing the future of automated mobility, that we shouldn't just take it as like this quite anachronistic gospel, you know, from 1939 or even earlier about what the technology looks like. You know, it's a perfected car. And then we should think about it as a much more malleable, varied thing that we can write and rewrite and write and rewrite. And we can engage lots of different people in doing it. And we can try lots of different versions of it and see what works. And so, you know, you look at all the vehicle types and all the services and all the places that there are different places in cities controlled environments, environments with pedestrians, environments that have pavement markings. In Canada, every place that Canada is funding academic work or industry work on fully autonomous vehicles, they're also funding work on connected vehicle infrastructure, because Canada's covered in snow half the year. And so Canada won't have this unless they build the automated highways to an extent. And they know that. So, there's also that piece to weave into it. I think it's fascinating to me, just like how many narratives there are and how much more interesting this gets when you sort of look at all the potential for the narrative around automated vehicles to just kind of blossom and explode from what we've had for the last decade, which has just been really, really, really narrow, and I think in many ways missing the big opportunities.
Very interesting. And I assume that when you're writing a book like this, that you invest so much time and effort into it, that you're hoping that 2 weeks afterwards, some company doesn't come out and make some blockbuster announcement that makes it all outdated. I mean, there's always that danger when you're writing about technology.
Yeah, I try not to make too many predictions. What I try to write about is lenses, these are the glasses that I put on when I look at the future, or these are the themes. So, the book's organized around what I call 3 big stories about the future: specialization, which is, the sort of variety of vehicle services and even driving behaviors; materialization, which is about freight and e-commerce; and then financialization, which is looking at, I think, some of the really potentially scary outcomes when you hook an automated mobility system up to a largely automated global financial system, and potentially repeat some of the really bad outcomes that we had, say, in energy or in food commodity markets, or in the mortgage market, when we had similar kinds of linkages get created there. That there's actually a historic precedent for some really bad outcomes. Like when the electric streetcars came along, there are some real parallels between electrification of streetcars and what's going on with automation, and the way that what they call traction monopolies got established in a lot of cities, where you basically had one company, which was often in cahoots with a corrupt local government, controlling all the surface transportation, all of the electricity, and all the lighting in a city. Basically, not unlike the kind of stranglehold that we worry about with some of the tech giants now, really, controlling our modern life, all the utilities of our modern life. And so, I think those things aren't going to change. I think 10 years from now, specialization will still be it'll be a useful lens. Materialization, I think, will be a useful lens. Financialization, I'm hoping, is totally obsolete and not a problem at all. I hope we have a fully competitive, fair marketplace for automated mobility. And then I've been completely proven wrong on that one, but I suspect that I will not be.
But isn't the objective of capitalism to create a monopoly? Every capitalist knows that if they can get and monopoly 80% of the market share, look at our tech giants now. Whatever we're.
Sure. It's the objective. It's not a desirable outcome.
I understand. From them, it's a desired outcome. For the public at large, it may not be the desired outcome.
I'll be honest with you. That was the sort of shakiest ground for me as a researcher and writer. I did my best to try to lay out my concerns and my questions, and what I saw pointing towards that, and then to provide some of the historical breadcrumbs to give people a sense of why I thought it was important. I think there's a lot more to do there. There's a bit of unfinished work. But you know what really concerned me was seeing what Softbank is doing. I mean, for all intents and purposes, Softbank is channeling the proceeds from the liquidation of the Saudi oil empire into the construction of a global automated mobility empire. That, you know, if you look at how they have dealt with national antitrust regulators, say in Singapore, for instance, where you would expect an effective response, there, you know, was not an effective response because they're too big. And so what SoftBank was able to do is when they bought Grab in Singapore, Vietnam, and Philippines, they pulled Uber out of those markets. And all the antitrust regulators said, this is terrible. You know, the Philippines and Vietnam, they got off pretty easily. Singapore levied like one of the largest antitrust fines they've ever levied. It was like $20 million. It's like a half a day's operating profits or something. And yes, I mean, if Singapore can't control them, I mean, who can, right? So, and they've been systematically doing this now. So I look at that and I think that's probably a bad thing. And, you know, comparing it to so that's one sort of data point. I mean, another data point is to look at Waymo and, you know, are they sufficiently far ahead now as we enter this like trough of disillusionment around self-driving that like nobody can catch them? That's a you know, a realistic question.
But the problem I think for Waymo is that they have their part of the market is still at zero. I mean, you know, they moved 6 people around Chandler, big deal. I mean, this is you know, and the reason why SoftBank's in this is global mobility market is an enormous market, and if you have it, but you have to get in there and actually provide mobility. And so far, nobody's providing any mobility. They have, you know, a bunch of things they can put up on shelves. They have, you know, some code that they've written, but nobody's out there actually delivering it. You know, in the purchase world, Amazon is actually delivering, you know, things that you buy online. They're actually doing that. You know, we're still at the enormous beginning. We're still maybe at 1939 on this, you know, for all we know. I mean,
yes, I mean that like Amazon's another great example. I mean, an Amazon last mile monopoly. Like, what if nobody else can move freight, you know, as cheap and as fast as Amazon? That's probably not a good outcome.
Yeah, it's probably not a good outcome, but they're out there trying to do it. Why else? I mean, they're out there buying Zooks. Of course, it's cheap, whatever, get the people. They have to, if they can control that, then, oh my goodness, then Walmart's not going to be able to compete with them. And Walmart's.
Yes, I mean, I think of that part of the book is really sending up a flare to kind of ask like, well, who cares about this? And this is something we need to keep an eye on. I don't know if I would do anything about it yet. I'm not of the mind that like we've got to stop this right away.
Yeah.
But and then it also raises some really interesting questions about, you know, like congestion pricing, which looks like a great tool on the surface. You know, does that become like a gateway drug to this kind of running out of control, where we're basically, you know, embracing a market-based mechanism for allocating all this stuff that would really potentially become a slippery slope to
that's a slippery.
all of those assets up for sale.
Very interesting insights, Anthony.
So,
Ghost Road is the name of the book. We'll continue in just a moment, but this is a good time to remind you about our sponsor, the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF, symbol MOTO. To get more info, head to motoetf.com. On the website, it's a good idea to read the white paper. It's titled The Smart Transportation Revolution. It's under the Insights and News tab there. Lots of great information to help you make informed investing decisions. ETFs, as you may know, are a smart way to spread risk with investments and focus on a particular category. And the site again is motoetf.com. Getting to some of the headlines in the latest smart driving car newsletter, both Lyft and Uber are now saying they would shut down in California if the state forces them to classify drivers as employees. This battle's been going on for a while. It seems to be reaching a head.
Yeah, and shut down temporarily until they can somehow get the courts to maybe have the state back off. Unfortunately, those folks probably need a living wage and need some support. And so, unfortunately, the driver doesn't come for free in Uber, Lyft. And of course, that's why I continue to work on the driverless pieces until you can pull the driver out of there. You can't provide that mobility at an affordable way. And but unless once we do the technology, California decides to say, oh no, the driverless technology now needs to be called an employee, and although that's tongue in cheek, I guess it won't ask for too much health care coverage if it's.
Of course, during the pandemic, revenues that they've both reported, Lyft and Uber, have kind of fallen off a cliff here.
Yeah, well, it's not being used. People aren't going places. Mobility's down. So yeah.
I mean, Uber has shifted quite markedly towards delivery of food, which is
Uber Eats, yeah,
much lower margin.
Yeah. Yeah, and one wonders whether or not sure, you can do that. To me, the real value is providing mobility for people who need to go from A to B when they want to go there, and to do that affordably. And that's the improvement in the quality of life of those people. And somehow we still have to do some of that. Although, Anthony, I'd like to get back to one more of your little points, if I could take another minute of your time. Since you grew up in a rural area, okay, I'm really wondering, do you want to live in Shanghai? Not Shanghai, but a Shanghai. I mean, do you want to live in a tower? It really, is that the right place for people to live?
I think people have a variety of preferences, and there are a lot of reasons why people find those kinds of dwellings appealing. Again, they want access to things that are in central cities.
Is it only the people that also have a place out in the Hamptons or or on the Vineyard? And what about the real folks?
I think people go through changes at different points in their life too, where they have different housing needs. So, but yeah, I mean, there's also energy consumption considerations that, it tends to, in general, be more energy efficient to pack more people, into less land, and a whole bunch of things. So I think there's certainly some social interest in having that. But I don't think it's for everyone. I'm not like Ed Glazer, who lives in the suburbs, but says that everybody else has to live in a high rise.
Good. I'm glad you're not.
Yeah. I live in a row house in Jersey City, so I sort of split the difference.
Yeah.
But
down here in the Princeton bubble, I have no perspective, so I'm just, what the hell?
And you got the town to yourself with the students not coming back either.
Oh,
right?
yeah. Oh, my goodness. Although we did, as we mentioned before, we do have two of our former graduates who went and picked up a couple of hotels, one in Arkansas and one in Hawaii, and are going to create their own sort of Princeton bubbles out there, and invite students to come there to learn remotely on Zoom, whatever.
A couple of other quick things to mention here, Alan. American University's Salika Talbot said in a virtual Axios event this week that a lack of federal policy has hampered the autonomous car industry's transparency with communities where the vehicles are tested.
Yeah, I think, Salika has a point there, and that's correct. The question is why do we want, federal policy in here? Is that in case something goes bad, we can point to them, they let us do it or something. It'd be nice to have some leadership. It'd be nice for someone to be providing some overview on this, so that especially with the safety issue, which is all perception. One can have a feeling as to whether or when this stuff becomes safe enough for public consumption. And right now, it's everybody's actually competing on safety, which we've discussed many times on this, that we should be cooperating on safety. We shouldn't be competing on safety. Safety helps everybody. If this isn't safe, we don't even talk about it. 1939 GM, everybody implied that it was safe. Nobody was going to be out there. You didn't see any crashes going on in those little things that were going zipping back and forth. It's always been assumed that it's safe. In the 1950s and 60s videos, there's one car out there, and the safety has always been implied. It's been implied by the auto industry. It wasn't until Ralph Nader came up and even began to question it that anybody even began to even think that. Why? Because hey, if a product is perceived unsafe, nobody buys it. Okay, it's dead.
Another thing you highlight in the go ahead, Anthony.
Mark. I think one area where I'd like to see some federal vision and leadership in the next 6 to 12 months is assuming we make a big push into manufacturing, revitalizing manufacturing, assuming that it has some kind of green, sustainable dimension to it, a national vision around like motor freight transportation and the role of automation there, which is partly about pushing the technology in more aggressively, along with electrification, kind of modernization of the truck fleet and the logistics network, but also along with that, a plan for transitioning the workforce, because that's one of the biggest, I think, anxiety points around automation right now. But as a national project, a modern, clean, safe, efficient trucking fleet would really, be a huge boost, I think, and especially if we could do it without throwing tens of millions of fairly low-skilled people out of work with no prospect of future employment. That would be, I think, the right way to go. And then, there's definitely some good work going on in laying some of the planks of that vision, but I think somebody in government has to really pull it together.
Well, I agree with you. I tend to look at it a little bit more incrementally. I think that all this technology needs to improve the work environment for a trucker. I mean, the fact that a professional driver has to sit there, I've said this many times, sit there behind a wheel for 10 hours a day, making sure that he or she is fully engaged, otherwise they die. I mean, this technology that goes out and supports them and really reduces the stress of the job and makes it much more, not necessarily enjoyable, but livable, a way to really support your family without totally stressing you out. And who knows what you do to combat that. We won't even go into even thinking about it. And maybe, okay, give you an extra hour of service, give you an extra 2 hours of service so you can better feed your family, so you can be more productive. Do that. Get that really, that to me is within our grasp today and has ROI benefits to the CEO of each one of these trucking companies, because these truckers they're the part of their families. They don't want to see them crashing. They don't want to, pull out of their pocket an average of more than $10,000 a year for each truck for the self-insurance that they put out there. Do that. Once we do that really well, then we can talk about expanding it and having the person do more productive things. And sit there and keep the damn truck between two white lines, which is really tough, which requires a professional. The technology could really help there. That's kind of the way I've looked at that sucker.
Before we wrap up, Alan and Anthony, we always have to give our folks a Tesla update. Another interesting week for Elon Musk, announcing a 5-for-1 stock split. The share price, of course, going crazy again. And he's announced Starlink is manufacturing something like 120 new satellites designed for his new internet service per month. So,
I mean, is he really going to go out there and provide high-speed internet to all of our students that are now scattered around the whatever? And really, we might do a certain amount of teaching over Zoom, but boy, if you don't have good internet, good coverage, and Zoom goes in and out and whatever, I mean, how much pain and learning can a student endure?
Well, I'd just like to see another competitor offering broadband. That's all.
Well, I don't know, but a bunch of other people are putting up a bunch of satellites. Yeah. So I think Jeff has his own idea. Probably Bill has his own idea. Whatever to do, and even the astronomers are now saying, "Oh my goodness, we're going to have so many satellites out there, we aren't going to be able to see any stars anymore." I don't know.
Well, on that note, crazy. Alan, we want to thank Anthony Townsend for taking the time with us. Great having you here, Anthony. The name of the book again is Ghost Road: Beyond the Driverless Car, and the website for more info is starcitygroup.us. Thank you, Anthony.
Thanks for the conversation.
And thanks a lot. That was a lot of fun. Thank you.
And we want to remind you to check out the replay, video or audio of last month's Driving the Debate on Amazon Zoox and beyond. The site is drivingthedebate.com, and keep an eye out for more to come. Thanks to our sponsor, the Smart ETF's Smart Transportation and Technology ETF. The ticker symbol for the ETF is MOTO, and more information is available at motoetf.com. You can find us at smartdrivingcar.com, also on Anchor FM, Spotify, TuneIn, Apple, Google, Spreaker, SoundCloud, wherever you get your podcasts. Ask your smart speaker to play us. You can find my tech reports at textination.com. I'm Fred Fishkin along with Alain Kornhauser. Thank you for listening or watching, and please stay safe.
Have a great day, folks.